This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Bruchim Abam, Shalom Aleichem. We have a very interesting subject this morning, relevant to the Yom Tif of Purim Haba Aleinu L'Tova. We have a lamdish subject. Before we begin, some public service announcements. Baruch Hashem, the new Sefer in English came out. Here it is, The Concealed and the Revealed. You could get it in your local Svarim stores, or you could order it from ArtScroll at artscroll.com. And if you want the Hebrew Sefer on Purim, Maggid Harakiah, which has a different material, the Svarim have different material. There is overlap, but there is new material in each. You could get the Sefer also in your local Svarim stores, or you could order it at rabbidg.com with free shipping. Megillas Esther. Who wrote Megillas Esther? That's the subject of today's shiur. What do you mean, who wrote Megillas Esther? Esther! That's why it's called Megillas Esther. But if you look at the Gemara in Baba Basra, that talks about the authors of the various Sifrei Tanakh, the Gemara tells us on Daf Tezvav, Anshe Knesses Hagdoila Kasvu Kandig. Okay, so that's the mnemonic. That's your friendly mnemonic to help you remember the following four books. Kandig Siman. Yechezkel, Ushnei Masar, Daniel, Megillas Esther. The men of the Great Assembly wrote Yechezkel, the Trei Asar, Daniel, and Megillas Esther. Now, who were the Anshe Knesses Hagdoila? This was a body of 120 sages that convened toward the end of the 70 years of Galus Bavel into the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash until about the time of Shimon HaTzadik, for about 100 years into the second Beis HaMikdash. And this great assemblage consisted of great Chachamim and Nevi'im. So Mordechai was a member of the Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, Chag Zechariah Malachi, and they wrote the following four books: Yechezkel, Trei Asar, Daniel, Megillas Esther. And that's somewhat of a pella. Why couldn't Yechezkel write Sefer Yechezkel? Yechezkel was a Navi. Why couldn't he write his book? Why couldn't Daniel write his book? Why couldn't Mordechai and Esther write Megillas Esther? Says Rashi, Kasu Yechezkel, you know why? Shenisnave begoila. Because he prophesied in the diaspora. Says Rashi, I don't really know why Yechezkel didn't write it himself. That Rashi is bothered by a very strong question. Why couldn't Yechezkel write Sefer Yechezkel? Says Rashi, it must be prophecy was not allowed to be written in the diaspora, and therefore v'kasvam elu la'achar shabau la'aretz, and these wrote it after they came to Eretz Yisrael. So in other words, Rashi is telling us that he doesn't know of any particular reason why Yechezkel cannot write Sefer Yechezkel. The only thing he could come up with is that prophecy cannot be written in Chutz La'aretz. So they had to write it after they got back to Eretz Yisrael. So Yechezkel prophesied in the diaspora, and upon the Jewish people's return to Eretz Yisrael, so then the Anshe Knesses Hagdoila wrote Sefer Yechezkel. V'chein Sefer Daniel. Daniel's also Daniel's prophecy in Persia. But why couldn't Daniel write it? Wasn't Daniel a Navi? Now, whether Daniel was a Navi or not is a machlokes Rashi and the Shagas Aryeh. But Daniel is certainly one of the book of the Ksuvim, so why couldn't he write it? V'chein Sefer Daniel, Shahaya B'goyla. Because Daniel was in the Golus. V'chein Megillas Esther, and likewise Megillas Esther. In other words, Rashi's bothered, why couldn't Mordechai and Esther write Megillas Esther? And the answer is because it happened in Persia, and therefore there's a rule that loinitein shalaynitna nevua likasev b'chutz la'aretz, and therefore it was not written until the Jewish peoples returned to Eretz Yisrael, and it was written by Anshe Knesses Hagdoila. So black and white, the Gemara tells us that the book of Esther was not written by Mordechai, was not written by Esther, it wasn't even written by Charvoina or Hasach or Big Son and Saresh. It was written by Anshe Knesses Hagdoila. Here's the problem. The problem is, number one, if you look in Seder Olam, which is a collection of braisos, which is often referred to by Rashi. The Seder Olam says, Bayoim hahu, Bayohim hahu, Bamispar haharugim. On that day, the number of slain came. Uva oisoy hazman, and at that time, Lashana haba, in the following year, Ne'amar, Vatichtoi Esther HaMalka Vasavichayel Umardachai HaYehudi as called Toikef. So the Seder Olam is saying that Megillas Esther was written in the year after the miracle by Esther and Mordechai. So we've got ourselves a full-fledged, bona fide, certified contradiction between the Gemara Baba Basra and the Brisa and Seder Olam. The Gemara Baba Basra, as explained by Rashi, says Esther was not allowed to write Megillas Esther because le'nitna nevua likasev b'chutz haaretz. And here in Seder Olam, which is giving us a history of when the Megillah was written, it says that Esther wrote it. Furthermore, there's another contradiction in terms of when it was written. Not only is there a contradiction who wrote it, but there's also a contradiction when it was written. Because Rashi says that because there's a rule of Nitna nevua likasev b'chutz haaretz. Therefore, they had to wait until they got back to Eretz Yisrael, and the Anshe Knesset Gdola convened, and only then Megillas Esther was written, which was a number of years after the Purim miracle. And in Seder Olam, it says the Megillah was written the year after the Purim miracle. So not only do we have a contradiction who wrote the Megillah, it's a contradiction when the Megillah was written. Rashi says when they got back to Eretz Yisrael. Seder Olam says when in the year after the miracle. Furthermore, Rashi on Megillas Esther seems to support what it says in Seder Olam, because on the pasuk, Vayichtoiv Mordechai es hadvarim ha'eleh. Mordechai wrote these words, Rashi says. In other words, you might say, well, maybe Esther wrote like version 1 in the year after, but the Anshe Knesset Gdola came and they brushed it up and they polished it up and they edited and they fixed and they changed it up a little bit. So Rashi says, Vayichtoiv Mordechai He ha-Megillah hazois k'may shehi. The way he wrote this very Megillah, the way it is. So meaning the Megillah that we have today was written Mila b'Mila by Mordechai HaTzadik. He ha-Megillah hazois k'may shehi. So not only is it a stira between Rashi and Baba Basra and Seder Olam, but it's a stira in Rashi's. Because Rashi in Baba Basra says, Esther could not write the Megillah, le'nitna nevua likasev b'chutz haaretz, and Rashi in Megillas Esther says it was written by Mordechai. Next question. This is an interesting question. The Rambam paskins, you can't write a Megillah only with ink, on gevil, or on klaf, like a Sefer Torah, and if you wrote it with gallnut juice or some other liquids, it's kosher. Kasa b'shar minei tzavayim psula, if you wrote with other dyes, it's pasul. Utzricha sirtoid ketara atzma, it needs edging, scratching, you have to make lines like the Torah itself. So the Rambam seems to say that a Megillah has all the dinim of a Sefer Torah, you can only write it with diyai, on klaf, and if you wrote a b'shar minei tzavayim psula, and it needs sirtot like the Torah itself. But by the way, the Rambam says ve'ein ha'ar shalat sarach ibda lishma. It does not have to be tanned lishma. Interesting. Then the Rambam says if it's written on paper or on hide that's not me'ubad, it's pasul. So the Rambam seems to be saying that a Megillah has all the dinim of a Sefer Torah, with the exception of tanning. The ibud does not have to be done lishma. Why is that the sole exception, that does not have to be done and performed lishma? Next Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Megillah, Parak Beis, Halachia Beis, brings the following halacha. V'tzorech ha'koirei Likrois Aseres b'nei Haman v'Aseres b'neshima achas. The reader needs to read the 10 sons of Haman and the word Aseres in one breath in order to make it known that they were all hung simultaneously. Right? V'yes pashandasa v'yes talpa and v'yes asas v'yes purest v'yes adali v'yes aridas v'yes purest v'yes arida v'yes arida v'yes v'yesasa. You know why you have to do that. Chazal say it's because they were all hung b'neshima achas. But when Zeresh would make lunch, and she would want to get all her kids down to come eat at the table, what do you think she did? V'yes pashandasa, v'yes dalfa, and she said, "Come on, get over here." So anyway, that was a joke. Okay, in case you were wondering. But the Rambam says the halacha that you have to read the 10 sons of Haman in one breath in order to make it known that they were all hung together. And the minhag Kol Yisrael is that when you read the Megillah, you read it and you stretch it out like a letter to demonstrate the miracle, and then when you finish, you roll it up again and you make the bracha. Okay, now what's the source of the Rambam? The source of the Rambam is the Gemara Megillah Daf Tazayin, Amrav Ada de Min Yafai, Asaras B'nei Haman, Ba'asaras Tzarach Lememrinu B'neshima Achas. You need to read it in one breath. My taima Kulu Bahade Hadadi Nafki Nishmasa. They all died at once. By the way, this past Friday, I had the zchus to speak in Cincinnati, in the Koilo in Cincinnati, in the Mesivta of Cincinnati, and I wanted to go to the Hebrew Union Library. Now, Hebrew Union is a reform institution, but they do have the largest Jewish library in the entire world. They have hundreds of manuscripts of Rishonim and Achronim. It's the biggest Jewish library in the world except for in Eretz Yisrael. And many people have gone there. It's not, it's not a Beis HaKnesses. It's a secular institution. So I went in there. Officially it was closed, but I had some pull. And the curator and the digitalizer showed me some of their collection. They asked me what I'm interested in seeing. So I told them I want to see some of your illustrated Megillas Esther. So they literally had hundreds of ancient illustrated Megillas Esther, and they had the most incredible pictures by the Aseres B'nei Haman. You know what? I'm gonna show them to you. Let me see if I could do this. Give me 1 second. I want to show you what some of these illustrated Megillas look like. Give me 1 second, because I want to show you what their Aseres B'nei Hamans look like. Let's see if I could do this. Anyway, in these illustrated Megillas, they actually have a picture of the 10 sons of Haman. Let me see. Oh, here we go. What do you know? This is unbelievable. You're going to like this. Let me see if I could get you on this. New share. Rabbi, so do you see it? Okay, so this is an example of an illustrated Megillah, I don't know, going back a few hundred years. And by the 10 sons of Haman, you have a picture of the 10 dead Amalekim hanging over here. Now, I'm saving the best picture for a different occasion, but there are many, many different versions of the 10 sons of Haman hanging. Okay, anyway, back to the ranch over here. Let me get you back over here. Okay. The Rambam brings this halakha. By the way, there's an interesting shaila whether you're allowed to have pictures in the Megillah. Is it halachically permissible? But I'm just showing you that it was very common to have all of these Megillos also had the brachos written in the Megillah, in Ksav Ashuris. Anyway, that comes to the Gemara Megillah Daf Tez Zayin. And the Gemara says, another 2 halachas. Rabbi Yochanan, Vav devaizasa tzarich lemimtecha bezakifa kamardaya delivrais. The Vav of Vaizasa you need to elongate like the oars of a certain kind of boat. My taima kulu b'chadzakivos dakafu. They're all hung at the same time. So that's the halacha that the vav of vaizasa has to be either pronounced elongated or written very long. And then the Gemara brings a third halacha. Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa darash Rab Shila ish kfar tamarta kol hashirois kulan nechtavois ariach agabi leveno leveno agabi ariach. All songs in the Tanakh are written a half a brick on a full brick and a full brick on a half a brick. For example, Oz Yashir, where you have two side pieces and the next line a long piece in the middle. The next line, two side pieces. The next line, a long. So in all the shiros, you have half brick, full brick, half brick, full brick, with the exception of the song of the Aseres B'nai Haman and the song of the Malchei Canaan, that it's a half brick on a half brick and a whole brick on a whole brick. Why? My taima shaloi tekuma l'mapalasan, so that they should have nothing to hold them erect when they fall. This way, when Parmashta falls, he's going to fall on his head and crack his head open, and nothing's going to catch him from anything in the middle. In other words, it's just two rows on the sides, and when the guy on the top falls, he's going to come crashing down. So these are three halachos in the Gemara Megillah Daf Tazayin. Number one, the 10 sons of Haman have to be said in one breath. Number two, the vav of Vaizasa has to be elongated. And number three, it has to be a half a brick on a half a brick and a whole brick on a whole brick. And the Maggid Mishnah wonders why the Rambam only codifies one of these halachos. The Rambam only brings the halacha that you have to say the 10 sons of Haman in one breath. The Rambam does not bring the halacha that the vav of Vaizasa needs to be long, and the Rambam does not bring the halacha that it has to be a half a brick on a half a brick and a whole brick on a whole brick. Says the Maggid Mishnah, Ushteim behalachos, v'lo yadati laman lo nizrav b'divrei. I don't know why the Rambam did not bring down these halachos. So we have a number of questions so far. Number one, who wrote Megillas Esther? The Gemara Bava Basra, Anshe Knesset Hagdola. Seder Olam and Rashi, Mordechai and Esther. That's question number one. Question number two, when was Megillas Esther written? Bava Basra, according to Rashi, was written when they got back to Eretz Yisrael. Seder Olam and Rashi, it was written the very next year. Question number three, we'll see if we get to why of all the halachos of Sefer Torah, there's only one that doesn't apply to Megillas Esther, and that is it does not need ibud lishma. And question number four is why is it that when the Rambam codifies the halacha about the 10 sons of Haman, they need to be said in one breath? Why does the Rambam not also bring down the halacha that the vav of Vaizasa needs to be long and it has to be written a half a brick on a half a brick and a whole brick on a whole brick? And now finally, question number 5. The Ar Zarua, Rabbi Yitzchak Mivina, as we've mentioned a number of times, why would he name it Ar Zarua? It's because he was writing how to spell names in Gittin, and he wasn't sure how to spell the name Akiva, and he saw in a dream the pasuk Ar Zarua Lat Sadik Uli Yishrei Lev Simcha, and that spells out Soifei Teva is Rabbi Akiva. So because he had this heavenly demonstration, therefore he named the Sefer Ar Zarua. Okay, so we know that when you write a Sefer Torah, there are parshas psuchos, parshios stumos. You have some parshios that you only have a couple of spaces when they're concluded. Other parshios begin on the next line. What about Megillas Esther? Are the parshios in Megillas Esther, are they psuchos or are they susumos? Says the Ar Zarua, Gamashti Amalka, that's a parsha susuma. Ba'yoim hashviyi is psucha. Ba'araba is susuma. Kilshain Amoy is psucha. Ish Yehudi is susuma. B'haisabi amna itai susuma. Divrei hayamim lefnei hamelech, and he goes through all the various parshios, whether the psuchos or susumais, and after giving us all the psuchos and susumais, the Ar Zarua ends off the parshios. Lo shamati, regarding the parshios, I don't know. No one ever told me whether they should be psuchos or stumais. In psuchos or stumais. Mistabra, they should be susumais. Why? Like tefillin and mezuzos are susumais. What when the world is going on the Ar Zarua? He just recorded all the psuchais and stumais in the Megillah. He told us which ones are psuchais, which ones are sesumais, and then he says, "Oh, regarding the parshios, whether they're psuchais or stumais, I don't know, not sure. Nobody ever told me. Probably they're sesumais, like stam, like tefillin and mezuzos." So the Arzarua is inexplicable. Why would he first tell us what the psuchas and stumas are, and then say he doesn't know, and they're probably sesumais? Here's another question. And after our 6 questions, we're going to give one answer. It says in the Gemara Megillah Daf Yotes, regarding the writing of the Megillah, it has to be written on a parchment and with ink. Minalan, where do we learn it from? Asya ksiva ksiva. We make gzer shava ksiva ksiva. Ksiv hacha, it says over here by the Megillah, vatichtaiv Esther Amalka. It says vatichtaiv. Uksiv hasam, and it says about Megillah Seicha, vayir melhem baruch mi piv yikra elai is called var ma'ela, va'ani koisev ala sefer b'diyai. From his mouth he will read all of these words, and I will write it on parchment with ink. So since it says regarding Megillah Seicha, ksiva, and it says by Megillas Esther ksiva, just like Eicha has to be on parchment with ink, Esther has to be with parchment with ink. Ask the Brisker of, what in the world is going on over here? Why would you need a gzeira shava to specifically learn out, just like Eicha is on parchment with ink, so to Esther? If Eicha is written on parchment with ink, then all the Kisei HaKodesh, all the books of Tanakh, have to be written on parchment with ink. Why would I need a special Gzeir Shava to apply it to Esther? Eicha is one of the books of Ksuvim. So, just like Eicha requires parchment with ink, all the books of Tanakh should require parchment with ink. Why would I need a special Gzeir Shava? So let's recap the 6 questions. We'll definitely answer 5 of them. We'll see if we can answer the 6th. Question number 1. Who wrote Megillas Esther? Was it Anshe Knesses HaGedolah, as stated in the Gemara Bava Basra on Daf Tezvav, or was it Mordechai and Esther, like it says in Seder Olam, Parak Chaf Tes, and in Megillas Esther, Parak Tes, Pasuk Chaf? Question number 2, when was the Megillah written? Was it written by the Anshe Knesses HaGedolah according to, upon their return of the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael, as Rashi in Masechta Bava Basra says, or was it written in the very next year, like it says in Seder Olam? Question number 3. Why does the Rambam only codify the halacha that you have to read the 10 sons of Haman in one breath, and not codify the halacha that the Vav of Aizasa needs to be written long, and codify the halacha that the song of the Aseres Bnei Haman needs to be written Ariach agabe Ariach, Ulavena agabe Lavena? That is question number 3. Question number 4, the Arzarua. Arzarua says that he tells us what the parshios of Megillas Esther are. Some are psuchais, some are stumais. And then he inexplicably says, oh, regarding the parshios, I don't know anything about it. Nobody ever told me. They're probably sesumais, just like tefillin and mezuzos. So he contradicts himself. And finally, question number 5 is, why do I need a special Gzeira Shava to tell me that Megillas Esther has to be written with ink on parchment? All of Tanakh has to be written with ink and parchment. And the answer to all of these questions, and the 6th question, by the way, which I'm not sure we're going to come and answer, is why is the dinim of Megillas Esther are like a Sefer Torah, with the exception, according to the Rambam, that they don't need ibud lishma, they don't need to be tanned lishma. Why? Why is that the only exception? So Marv Rabbi Sai, here goes. There is an amazing opinion in the Gemara Megillah that Esther does not render one's hands tameh. We know that we have 24 books of Tanakh, 24 books of Scripture, and that constitutes the Torah Shebachsav. In other words, let's say we have over here the Sefer, what I got on my desk over here. I would use the Maggid Harakiah, but you're going to think that I'm making a commercial for it, and I'm trying to encourage its purchase. So I wouldn't want to do that in the middle of the Shiur, so I'm going to use a different sefer, right? Okay, I have Chavatzelos HaSharon. It's a beautiful sefer, amazing sefer. What's the difference between Chavatzelos HaSharon and the Sefer Daniel? The answer is that Sefer Daniel comes from Tanakh. And if it comes from Tanakh, it has Kedushas Torah Shebechsav. What are the ramifications of Kedushas Torah Shebechsav? That is, it's Metame Es Hayadayim. We know that Kisvei HaKodesh is Metame Es Hayadayim. So all the books of Tanakh render the hands Tameh. However, the Gemara brings the amazing Shita of Shmuel, the unusual Shita of Shmuel, that Esther does not render the hands Tameh. Wait a second, says does that mean that Shmuel holds that Esther was not written Baruch HaKodesh? Are you going to say that Shmuel holds that Esther was not written Baruch HaKodesh? But Shmuel said that Esther was written Baruch HaKodesh. Are you going to say that Shmuel holds that Esther is not part of Tanakh? Get a load of this. Nemra likrois v'lei nemra lichtayv. Shmuel holds that Esther was said Baruch HaKodesh to read it, but not to write it. Meaning, you could read it, but you cannot write it down. Which presumably would mean it's part of Tanakh, but you're only allowed to read it, but you're not allowed to write it. So Tosfos says, excuse me, how do you read something that's not written? Answers Tosfos that it must be, you read it Baal Peh. You have to say it by heart. In other words, it's part of Tanakh, but it's like, it's Torah Shebal Peh part of Tanakh, but you can't write it. So Tosfos asks, but the Mishnah says on Parak Beis that if you read it Baal Peh, lo yatsa. So how exactly can you read it if it's not written? You can't say, well, you can read it Baal Peh. The Mishnah says you can't read it Baal Peh. Says Tosfos, you know what Shmuel holds? It was said Baruch HaKodesh to read, but not to write. So you say, so how do you read it? Oh, you write it down, Baal Peh, you write it down. But the written text is only a rabbinic document to fulfill the mitzvah of Megillas Esther. But it's not as a document part of Tanakh. Meaning, I'll bring you an example. Some people, they say Pitamak Torah from a klaf. Is that Tanakh? No. What is that? It's just a document that's there to say the Pitamak Torah. So the same thing with Megillas Esther. It is not part of Tanakh. What is it? It's a piece of paper that you read the Megillah from. That's all it is according to Shmuel. It's a piece of paper that you read the Megillah from. Does it have Kedushas Tanakh? Nope. Is it Metames Yadayim? Nope. Was it said Baruch HaKodesh? Yeah. But it was only said Baruch HaKodesh. The words were said Baruch HaKodesh, but it has no sanctity as part of Tanakh as a written document in the opinion of Shmuel. Now don't forget, we don't hold like Shmuel. Comes the Ritva, and the Ritva argues on Tosfos. The Ritva says, no, you can't say that according to Shmuel, it's only a written document rabbinically. So Shmuel says, Avada, it's a written document. It's a written document, but it's not part of Tanakh. Is it written Baruch HaKodesh? Yeah, it's written Baruch HaKodesh to be Yotzei, the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. That is the opinion of the Ritva. It is considered Nitein Likasev. It was said, Nitein Likrois. It was said to read, V'lei Nitein Likasev. Meaning, it was not written, it is not, in its written form, it is not part of Tanakh. So what is it written for? It was written only to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. I'll give you an example. Tefillin and mezuzos. When it's written down, is it Chumash? It's not Chumash. It's written down for a specific designated purpose to Mekayim, the mitzvah of Tefillin. It's written for a specific designated purpose to Mekayim, the mitzvah of mezuzah. So too, Megillas Esther. it is said Baruch HaKodesh, but it's not written Baruch HaKodesh. It's only written to Mekayim the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. However, we don't hold like Shmuel. We hold that not only is it written to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, but it was also part of Tanakh. Now, it comes out, says the Brisker Rav, that Megillas Esther has two different statuses. It is a document with which we fulfill the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, even if it would not be part of Tanakh. And the proof is in Shmuel. According to Shmuel, it's not part of Tanakh, but it's a written document to fulfill the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. So it has the status of a written document to be the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, even though it's not part of Tanakh. So let's say I whip out my Megillah. Here we go. I'm not going to touch it now, because the halacha is before you touch a Megillah, you're required to wash netilas yadayim. You know that halacha? So what do you mean netilas? Your hands are not dirty. If you're giving a shiur, then obviously my hands are clean. No. Stam yadayim, puzzle to handle a Megillah. There's a chiyuv of netilas yadayim before you touch the Megillah. It's a very important halacha. But when we take out Megillas Esther on Purim, are we taking it out as part of Tanakh? No. We're taking it out as the document that we need to read from on Purim. But there's another status of Megillas Esther, and that is, it's Kisvei HaKodesh. It's part of Tanakh, and it's Metamei Yadayim. And these two different dimensions of Megillas Esther have two different sets of halacha and bring along with it different ramifications. And let's use this idea of these two dimensions of Megillas Esther to answer the questions that we began with. Again, the idea we're advancing, and this is the idea of Chidushe Maran Riz Halevi in Hilchos Megillah, Parak Beis, Halacha Tes, that there are two distinct aspects of the Megillah, as we see from the Shita of Shmuel in Masechta Megillah and Daf Zayin. So with this, the Brisker Rav says as follows. He says, the Gemara in Bava Basra on Daf Tesvav says that Anshe Knesset Agdal wrote the Megillah, and Rashi says, hey, I don't know, why didn't Yecheskel write it? Why didn't Esther wrote it? It must be that Leinitna Nevua Likasei B'chutz La'aretz, and they had to wait for Anshe Knesset Agdala. So we asked two questions, because Rashi and Seder Oilam and Rashi on the Megillah says Mordechai and Esther wrote it. And furthermore we asked, did Esther and Mordechai write it in the next year, or did they have to write a couple of years until Anshe Knesset Hagdolah wrote it? The answer is so simple. Of course Esther wrote the Megillah, and she wrote it immediately after the Purim miracle in the next year. She wrote it together with Mordechai. What did she write it for? She wrote it as a document that would be used to read on Purim. And at that time, was it part of Tanakh? Absolutely not. Not according to anybody. Everyone agrees it was not part of Tanakh. Because Rashi tells us, in order to be part of Tanakh, it has to be written down in Eretz Yisrael. And the Jewish people did not even return to Eretz Yisrael yet. But of course, even though they didn't return to Eretz Yisrael, they still read the Megillah on Purim, not as a book of scriptures, but as a special book that the Nevi'im legislated to read from on Purim. That's not part of Tanakh. The same way, when you sing Kari Bain Friday night, it's such a beautiful song. It was written by Rabbi Yisrael Najara, and the Arizal said he had the soul of David HaMelech. I have a question. Is Kari Bain part of Tanakh? No. Is it Torah? No. So what are you doing? What am I doing? I'm singing Zmiras for Shabbos. That's what I'm doing. So, in the year after the Purim story, they had this beautiful document. Who wrote it? Esther. Was it part of Tanakh? Absolutely not. And they used it to Mekayim, the Mitzvah Midivay Nevi'im, of reading the Megillah. And was it Bittul Torah? You bet it was Bittul Torah. But Chazal say, Mevatlin Talmud Torah, Ba'al Nishmaya, Mikra Megillah. Because this was a document, it was not canonized, it was not part of the Torah. Why not? First of all, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah never ratified it. Secondly, you can't write Nevuah outside of Eretz Yisrael as part of the Kisvei HaKodesh. However, a couple years passed, and they got back to Eretz Yisrael, and Esther petitioned the Chachamim, Kisvuni l'doros, Write me for all generations. What was Esther's petition? Esther's petition was, do me a favor, I want to be part of Tanakh. And the rabbi said, we can't do it. We already wrote about Amalek 3 times in the Tanakh. We can't write about him anymore. And Esther said, no, you'd have to know how to read the pasuk. Shalashim is 1 time are the 2 mentions in Chumash, 1 time is the mention of Nevi'im, and I'm the 3rd time. So the Chachamim said, you know what, you're right, Esther. We're going to canonize you. We're going to put you as part of Tanakh. Now you're Kisvei HaKodesh. Now you're Metamei Yadayim. So in year 1, when they read the Megillah, they were reading a beautiful song of Hashgacha Pratis that had no status of Talmud Torah. But then later on, the Chachamim ratified and allowed Esther to be canonized. And that's answer number 1. Who wrote the Megillah? It depends for what? Regarding it being a document to read on Purim, Mordechai and Esther. Regarding it being Kisvei HaKodesh as part of Tanakh, Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. Regarding our question, when was it written? The answer is it depends for what. Regarding it being a document to read on Purim, it was written in the year after the Purim story. Regarding it being part of Tanakh, it was canonized upon the Jewish people's return to Eretz Yisrael. Let's move on to question number 3. We asked that the Rambam says that when you read the Megillah, you have to say the 10 sons of Haman in one breath. And that comes from the Gemara Megillah Daf Tez Zayin. And that Gemara says 2 other halachos. One of them, you have to have a big vav of Vaizasa. And the third one is, yet it has to be written half brick on a half brick and a whole brick on a whole brick. And the Maggid Mishnah says, I'm not really sure why the Rambam only brought one of these dinim. If he's bringing the din of singing the 10 sons of Haman in one breath, why would he not also bring the din that it has to be a big vav of Vaizasa, and it has to be half a brick on a half a brick and a full brick on a full brick? And to that, the Brisker Rav says as follows. Check this out. Says the Brisker Rav. He quotes the Gemara Megillah, he quotes the Maggid Mishnah, and he says very simply that there are 2 dinim of Megillas Esther. Megillas Esther has 2 aspects to it. It's one of the 24 books of Tanakh. And number 2, it's a document that we read on Purim. Now, the halacha that we need to read all 10 sons of Haman in one breath. Why? Is that a halacha that emanates from Esther being a book of Tanakh? Or is that a halacha that emanates from this document being something we read on Purim? The answer is the latter. The reason why we say the 10 sons of Haman in one breath is it's now Purim, and we want to relive the miracle, and therefore we say the 10 sons of Haman in one breath as part of our responsibility of reading this document on Purim. And therefore we understand why the Rambam in Hilchos Megillah, Perek Beis, Halacha Yud Beis, codifies V'tzarech HaKori Likros Eses Bnei Haman V'asaras B'neshima Achas. But if I were to ask you, why is there a big vav in Vaizasa? Why is the song of the Asaras Bnei Haman written half a brick on a half a brick and a whole brick on a whole brick? Is that because that's a requirement of it being a document that you read on Purim? Absolutely not. Because documents that you read on Purim, there's no requirement that it have big letters and small letters. There's no requirement that the song be written in a certain way. That's a halacha of the Megillah being one of the Kisvei HaKodesh. As we know in a Sefer Torah, there are big letters and small letters. Of Tanakh, there are big letters and small letters. In Tefillin and Mezuzos, there are no big letters and small letters. So the halacha that Megillas Esther has to have some big letters and small letters, that's not a Purim document halacha, that's a Tanakh halacha. And therefore the Rambam doesn't bring anywhere in any of his writing which letters of Tanakh are big and which are small. That's all a matter of tradition. Therefore, the Rambam in Hilchos Megillah only brings the first halacha that you have to say the 10 sons of Haman in one breath, because that's a halacha of it being a document that you read on Purim. But the Rambam does not bring the halacha that the vav has to be big. That's a halacha of it being mikisvei hakodesh. And the Rambam does not bring the halacha that it has to be written a half a brick and a half brick and a whole brick and a whole brick. So according to the Brisker Rav, it comes out an amazing halacha that if in your Megillas Esther, it's not written a half a brick and a half a brick, and the Vav of Aizas is small, you could be yoytze your mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, because it's not a halacha that emanates from Mikra Megillah. It's a halacha that emanates from it being Kisvei HaKodesh. Now, but if it didn't have a big Vav, and it didn't have a Riach Agab, it would not be Mitames Yadayim, because that's a halacha of it being Kisvei HaKodesh. Now let's come back to the Or Zarua, and this really is remarkable. This is Ayam V'Naira. So we answered up who wrote Megillah. We answered when the Megillah was written. We know why the Rambam only brings the halacha that you have to read the Aseres Ve'Haman in one breath, not the halacha of the big Vav and the Ariach Agabe Ariach. Let's go to the Or Zarua. Says the holy Or Zarua, this parsha is Sesuma, that parsha is Psucha, Gam Vashti is Sesuma, Bayim Hashvi is Psucha, Ba'araba is Sesuma. And then the Or Zarua concludes, by the way, what about the Parshas of Megillas Esther? I never heard anything. Probably it has to be Sesumais, like Tefillin and Mezuzos. So the Or Zarua is contradicting himself. First he tells you which ones are Psuchas, which is Stumas, and then he says they're Stumais. Says the Brisker Rav, they're two separate halachas. Number one, Esther is one of the books of Tanakh. And every book of Tanakh has Sesumais and has Psuchais. So therefore, in the context of it being one of the 24 books of Tanakh, the Or Zarua tells us which parshios are Sesumais and which are Psuchais. Gam Vashti is Sesuma, Bayim Hashvi is Psucha. Just like all books of Tanakh have Sesumais and Psuchais. But now the question is, it being a document that you read on Purim, in that context, in that dimension, are the Parshias Psuchos or are they Sesumais? Regarding that, the Or Zarua says, I don't know, nobody ever told me. I don't have a tradition regarding how the formation of Parshios in a document needed to be read on Purim. He said, probably this would be no different than Tefillin and Mezuzos. The same way Tefillin and Mezuzos, they're not Tanakh. You're not putting a Tanakh on your doorpost. You're not putting a Tanakh opposite your mind and opposite your heart. You're putting a specific Parsha from the Torah that's being designated for the purpose of a specific mitzvah. Tefillin and Mezuzos are all Sesumais. So the Or Zarua says probably Megillas Esther, as a document read on Purim, it should be Sesumais. Now it seems we don't do that. It seems that we formulate the Parshios the way it is formulated as a book of Tanakh, but this would be the way to read the Or Zarua. And penultimately, the Gemara says in Masechta Megillah Daf Yotas, how do you know Megillas Esther has to be written with a book with ink? So the Gemara says, we make a Gzeira Shava. It says Ksiva by Megillas Esther, and it says Kesiva by Eicha, just like by Eicha, it has to be on cloth with ink, so too, Esther has to be cloth with ink. And we asked, the Pasuk, Va'ani Koisev ala Sefer B'diyai, that's talking about Ksuvim, and Esther is part of Ksuvim. So why do I need a special Gzeira Shava to say, just like Eicha has to be on a cloth with ink, so too Esther has to be a cloth with ink. I don't need a Gzeira Shava. Once I have a pasuk that the books of Ksuvim have to be on a cloth with ink, so automatically it would apply to Esther. Look in the Brisker Rav on page 2. He says, V'raya lazemi hadik habaya Gemara b'Megillah. The Gemara says, how do I know that Esther has to be written on a cloth with ink? And the Gemara says, I make a Gzeira Shava b'atichtoiv Esther, and it says, he says, L'chor lo melisa. The pasuk v'ani kozel leviyai is on Ksuvim. The Megillah is also one of the Ksuvim. So why do I need a special Gzeira Shava? You know why? Says the Brisker Rav very simply. Of course, Esther as a document of one of the 24 books of Tanakh has to be written on ink with parchment. There's no question. I learn out from the pasuk in Eicha. Of course, the book of Esther, as a book of Tanakh, has to be written on parchment with ink. But the question the Gemara wants to know is, as a document to read on Purim, how do you know it has to be written on a parchment with ink? Because that may have separate dinim, as it does. That is a separate dimension. So maybe to read on Purim, not as a document of Tanakh, you don't need parchment and ink. And the Gemara says the only reason you need parchment and ink is because there happens to be a special Gzeira Shava. It says Ksiva by Eicha, and it says Ksiva by the Megilla. So not only does Esther need a parchment with ink as a book, as part of the Tanakh, so too it also needs parchment with ink to be the document with which you read on Purim. Finally, we'll see if we can answer one question. The question, why is it that regarding tanning it lishma, the Rambam holds the hide of Megillas Esther does not need to be tanned lishma. He says that the Brisker says, many ask, why is tanning lishma different from some of the other dinim of the Sefer Torah that we apply to Megillas Esther? We know you can't write it on Gvil, or if an Apikoros or an Achi writes it. Why is Ibud Lishma different? The truth is, the Torah brings in the name of Rabbeinu Tam that since it's called a Sefer, we give it all the laws of Sefer Torah, even regarding Ibud Lishma, and that's the psak of the Ramban as well. So, why would we not apply the din of Ibud Lishma to Megillas Esther? To that, the Brisker says that the din of the Rambam, that he holds you don't need Ibud Lishma, is because the Rambam holds that the reason why Megillah, its din is like a Sefer Torah, is because it's called a Sefer. That's only regarding the specific dinim of Sefer Torah and how it's written. But not that Megillah has the same type of kedusha of a Sefer Torah. The din, the Rambam says, the Brisker advances that a Megillah has the status in halacha like a Sefer Torah is only regarding its writing, but not regarding its kedusha. So since Ibud Lishma is is its dimension of a kedusha Sefer Torah, that does not apply to a Sefer Torah. But the Ramban, who holds you do need Ibud Lishma, he says the din of Ibud Lishma of Sefer Torah is not dependent on Hazmana Milsa. It's a separate din of a Sefer Torah, like Lishma of Tzitzis. In other words, there's a question: why does the Ibud have to be Lishma? Do you need Ibud Lishma because it's part of the status of the Kedusha of a Sefer Torah? And that is the opinion of the Rambam, and therefore it's not extended to Megillah? Or is Ibud Lishma part and parcel of its din of Sefer, in the way it's written, and then it would apply to Megillah as well? Be it as it may, I think the Brisker has opened for us a very important dimension of the two aspects of Megillas Esther. It was certainly written right away, and it was certainly written by Esther, but that doesn't mean it's part of Tanakh. Yes, it would be a document that you could read on Purim, and you fulfill your mitzvah on Purim, but not necessarily was it canonized. And the issue of Megillas Esther being canonized is a very fundamental issue. It will help us understand many other subjects regarding whether it's considered Bittul Torah to read Megillas Esther. Because one could make the case that even according to the opinion that Megillas Esther was canonized, maybe it was only canonized regarding reading it on Purim and not for any other purpose. We might get into that more in Mirz Hashem next week. But the bottom line is, we needed Esther and we needed Anshe Knesset Agdola. Esther made it the document we read on Purim. Anshe Knesset Agdola made it one of the 24 books of Tanakh. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining. Wishing you all a wonderful day. Bracha v'atzlacha.
Rabbi Glatstein, according to the Ars Ruah, the Megillah may have been written one way.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.